Capacitors, like these, or caps for short, act like a fridge for electrons, storing them up until they are needed. When the capacitor is triggered, the stored charge is released. But how do capacitors work? Inside the capacitors are two conducting plates, divided by a thin layer of insulating material known as the dielectric. As the current flows, one of the plates becomes negatively charged due to the buildup of electrons. This repels electrons from the second plate, making it positively charged. The two plates are attracted, this plate to this plate, but they cannot join due to the separating dielectric. But when a path is available, the charges will move towards each other and the capacitor discharges. There are two important values to think of when capacitors come to mind. The first is this value. It is known as capacitance and represents the amount of farads that the capacitor can store. But a farad is a very large unit of measurement, so capacitors used in electronic projects normally have capacitances measured with this symbol, meaning microfarads, a millionth of a farad. The second value is this. Capacitors can only work up to a certain voltage, and this voltage is known as the working voltage. In this case we have quite a chunky capacitor, so the voltage is 100 volts of direct current. Now it tends to be the case that the bigger the capacitor, the larger the voltage it can handle. You can get capacitors with quite large differences in their capacitance, but the size is very similar. There's also another value, and this is the temperature coefficient. This represents the maximum temperature at which the capacitor can work at its given capacitance. Capacitors come in many different shapes and sizes, but normally they're grouped according to the material used for the dielectric, the insulating material between two plates, and their capacitance, or the amount of capacitance they can store measured in farads. In electronic projects, we normally come across two types of capacitor. Smaller capacitors like these are ceramic capacitors, and they normally handle capacitances of less than 1 microfarad. To know what capacitance they can handle, look on the number code on the front of the capacitor, and then Google ceramic capacitor capacitance code to find out how much capacitance it gives. The second type of capacitor is an electrolytic capacitor, and unlike the ceramic capacitor, this is polarized. It has a positive and negative terminal. Two ways to tell: the longer leg is the positive terminal, the shorter leg is the shorter terminal. And also, if we look on the side of the capacitor, there's a silver stripe, and the stripe corresponds to the negative terminal. So those are the two ways to tell. These terminals have to be hooked up correctly, otherwise the capacitor won't work as intended. Lastly, electrolytic capacitors can come in two different formats. When the terminals come out of the bottom, or one end like this, the capacitor is said to be radially mounted. Whereas when the terminals come out of either end like this, the capacitor is said to be axially mounted. Thanks for watching. Make sure to check out our other videos, and feel free to like, comment and subscribe.